Bob Michelsen was born in, thanks very much. Bob Michelsen was born in Minneapolis, graduated from South High School, enlisted at the Federal Building in the summer of '43 for the Aviation Cadet Program. Seemed to be something about that Aviation Cadet Program. Inducted out at Fort Snelling, probably not too far from where we are right now. Went through his basic in Jefferson Barracks in St. Louis. Went down to Louisiana, and then to a base in Augusta, Georgia. And his comment to me, the only thing he learned there, and it probably was at Fort Gordon or some base there, was KP. It was full-time KP. Then went over to gunnery school at Fort Myers, and he might want to elaborate on this thing, but one of the things he picked up as a part of his gunnery training was shooting clay pigeons. And that is now one of the great sports that he still goes out to the hunt and shoot club with the clay pigeons. And then they started doing clay pigeons on a curving road, and did a lot of missions out over the Gulf of Mexico in B-17s and B-24s. Went to Wichita, Kansas, got his crew assignment, went to B-29, got his B-29, went to Alamogordo, and to the point that was made, I think, by Hugh, they did a long-range mission over the Southwest, and they actually went out to the Pacific Ocean from Alamogordo on their cross-country, and they did formation flying while they were at Alamogordo. Went down to Wichita, Kansas, picked up a new B-29, went to Mather, which seems to be the port of debarkation, Hawaii and on. But he ended up in Guam, and ended up going on 10 missions. And Bob, I'd like for you to talk about some of the memorable missions you had, and then your final mission.
Now, am I on? Can you hear? Okay. So we'll fast forward to mission number 9. Is it on?
It's on.
Close to your mic. Close? Is this better? Okay, thank you. So we'll fast forward to mission number 9, which was the 24th of May, 1944. It was a night mission, Tokyo, left Guam about 5 p.m., arrived Fujiyama around midnight, and over the target, hit that large, that intense updraft that we tried to avoid, but we took it straight ahead. Bomb bay doors refused to close. So we had this drag on the airplane, and checked the circuits and the switches and everything. And finally, the only way to bring that bomb bay, the rear bomb bays, the doors up, was to get out in the bomb bay, hook the winch to the little screws on the end of the bomb bay, and winch it up by hand. We had used so much gas that we knew we couldn't get back to Guam, so we did land at Iwo Jima. And when I see Marines, I always buy them a drink because they saved our life there on Iwo. Got back to Guam about noon, and were listed for another mission beginning again at 5 o'clock, so we got very little sleep. We left Guam again about 5 over Fujiyama, sometime around midnight, picked up by the searchlights almost immediately, and hit twice. One in the number 2 engine, a magnesium fire, which was already mentioned, uncontrollable, and hit in the rear of in the tail section somewhere, so that the airplane was very difficult to fly. I got on the internet and I said, because I didn't want to blow up in midair, I said, let's get the hell out of here. And the bombardier's voice came on, and he said, no, let's ride it down, meaning don't bail out, we'll hit the ground, we're dead, but that's better off than what could happen. And the captain's voice came on, and he said, target straight ahead. And so we flew that plane that was burning and almost ready to blow itself up over the target, dropped the bombs, and then the signal came to bail out. I looked behind me, and the radio operator who had been throwing the chaff out to distract radio, or the radar ACAC, was lying there, and he was severely injured. There's a lot of blood. And with a radio check, we could not get any communication with our tail gunner. There was nothing I could do for the radio operator, so I took the pistol out that I had on my right side, laid it down on the floor of the airplane, turned around and said hello to Tokyo. As I was coming down in the parachute, I could, the searchlights were on me for just a little bit. And closer to the ground, could see what was going on down there. And there was a crowd gathering. I had a quick release harness on my parachute, so I released 8 to 10 feet above ground. I didn't want the parachute coming down on the top of my head. I wanted to know what was happening. And at that point, I saw what I thought were soldiers, rifles with bayonets, pointed at the crowd, not at me. Those soldiers were there to save me, and they kept that crowd away. A rope around your neck, tied your hands tied behind your back, and blindfold, and begin the march to somewhere. I had no idea where. And at that point, the crowd they did take a little retribution on the flyers that had dropped bombs. There was a post somewhere, and I was tied to it. A door opening and closing somewhere, I could hear. When the door opened or closed, they said hello to you with whatever. I thought it was some kind of a stick or a whip, but that was 4 or 5 times. And then in the middle of the night, an interesting thing. A voice said, "Would you like a cigarette?" I said, "Sure, I'll have one." So a cigarette put it to my lips, and I took a puff of that very, very strong tobacco. And then the voice said, "Wine." Excuse me, the voice said, "Tea." I had a little sip of tea, and then the voice said, "I have a cousin in America. Do you think my cousin is safe?" I didn't know how to answer. Retribution if I lied, and retribution if he knew better. So I said, if your cousin is a citizen, he'll be all right. That American laws are such that all citizens are safe. In the morning, a motorcycle, I could hear the sound of a motorcycle, and we were put in, or I was put in a trailer covered by canvas and driven through the streets and stopped at the corners where you were beat upon a little more by anybody standing around, and then another person put into the trailer that the motorcycle was pulling, and I heard him grunting and groaning, and I recognized his voice. It was our left gunner, so we held hands there for a little while. Took to a building and into a hallway where we were told to what I call sitting Oriental style, which is your knees folded under you, your back perfectly straight, your head bowed. That is rather painful after about 15 minutes. And after some hours, I bent forward to relieve all of that pressure and receive the appropriate, what they thought appropriate punishment for that. In the evening, the first interrogation, we called that interrogator Shorty. He was not a very nice person. He questioned you, of course, and you gave the appropriate answers. Where were you born? What was your mother's name, father's name, everything else. And then he started asking questions about the B-29, which I refused to answer. I woke up the next day in a hallway somewhere, and it was dark, and interrogation number 2. But this time they didn't ask questions, they started with the rough stuff. And I said, "What do you want to know?" And the questions became so interesting that after the war was over, I realized what they were asking. had I ever seen a B-29 with a large bomb bay? I said, no. Had I seen a B-29 with one bomb bay? No. Had I ever seen a bomb that was so big that was all you could put in a bomb bay? No. I thought, well, I've got to get out of this situation somehow. I'll answer their questions with a lie. So I said, I've heard of a blockbuster. And a blockbuster, I said, was a bomb so large, when it detonated, everything within 1,200 feet was obliterated. It would just crumble everything in that 1,200 feet. And that seemed to satisfy him, so I was turned over to another interrogator with whom we called Junior. The next day put into what we would call a jail cell here. As it turned out, it was the emperor's horse stalls converted to a jail. Interesting, isn't it, that the emperor would have put his horses someplace where they would not be bombed. These horse stalls were right next to a building that was the headquarters of Kempi Tai, who was the Gestapo of Japan. There were, I don't know how many prisoners in that cell, but they had promised the older prisoners who had been there, some of them since March, and I think one of them mentioned in Mr. Tillman's book was Richard, what was his name, Don? We looked it up in the book. Do you remember?
Fellow from
Carmichael. Richard Carmichael is named in Mr. Tillman's book. He was a person that took care of us after we got out of these horse stalls. We were there for, what was I suppose? There were so many people in these horse stalls. We could not stand, we could not sit. We had to kneel along the walls. And the Japanese then removed from these horse stalls, alphabetically, the older prisoners that were there, A to H. My last name begins with M, I'm alive. There were 62 taken out that we know of. Not one survived, not one. But they did make room for me. We could sit there and we couldn't, we weren't that crowded anymore. I'm going to just go forward quite a bit here because it would take too much time to tell you about everything that had happened in there. On the 15th of August, we were tied up, blindfolded, put in trucks, and taken to the shores of Tokyo Bay. We were told that we could go in the water and clean ourselves. The blindfolds were such that we could see quite a bit out of them, and we heard the machine guns being put together, and I was sure that this was my last day on Earth. There was a loud argument. I did not understand a word of the Japanese that they were arguing, but Junior was there, the interrogator, and he was arguing with the lead interrogator, whose name I learned was Kobayashi. And at the end of the argument, the machine guns were packed up, put in a truck, and that truck drove away. Then Junior told us that we would get back in the trucks. And most of us had a lot of difficulty getting in the trucks without help. But finally we made it, and we're taken to Camp Omori. And if any of you have read that book, Unbroken, that was the POW camp that prisoner was in. That was approximately the 15th of August, and we were told to stay in one of the barracks and not go out of that barracks except to go to the latrine in back of the barracks. The reason is that we were not POWs, we were war criminals. And war criminals are to be executed. And it was this colonel that told us, do not go out. You don't know how to bow. You don't know how to reply to Japanese orders. And for any excuse, you will be executed. stay in this building. Well, from that prison cell that we're into that building, I thought we were in a country club. So we stayed there. Food was brought to us, and we were there for several, probably 3 or 4 days. Then we were told to come out into the parade grounds because there was going to be a speech by the camp commandant. We stood at attention, and there were probably 300 other POWs there, the survivors of Bataan and Corregidor. The commander spoke, the interpreter gave us his speech in English, and essentially what he said was, Japan does not surrender. Japan and the United States are now allies. We have joined forces to fight the Russians. Aren't you happy? The next day, all of the Japanese in that camp, the guards and everybody else had gone. It was empty except for the interpreter. And the Corregidor and the Bataan POWs raided the PX, they raided the food stores, they went after everything they could find. Lo and behold, all kinds of Red Cross boxes. And we all were so emaciated and so hungry that we ate everything we could find. Of course, we got sick all over again. A few days later, the B-29s came over and dropped their barrels of clothing and of food and mostly vitamin pills. And by the time the war ended, we were putting on weight like you wouldn't believe. The 29th of August, there were all kinds of ships in Tokyo Bay. And we watched them as the number in the bay increased, and we knew that the war was over, that something was going to happen. From one of the ships came 2 big, not yachts, but lighters, I guess they would call them in England, motorboats full of Marines. And the Marines came up to the dock on the camp. And out stepped a man wearing a white hat, white short-sleeved shirt, white pants, white shoes. And he said, my name is Errol Stassen. You are now free. And the interpreter was the Japanese interpreter there said, I have no authority to release these prisoners. Errol Stassen pulled out his .45 pistol and pointed it at him and said, you have no authority, period. And so I celebrate that day, 29th of August, Freedom Day. Thank you.
I want to come back to it.
Can I just say this about our papers?
Sure.
The B-29s went over Japan with leaflets. They dropped over cities. I don't know how many they dropped, but usually 10 or 12 cities at a time, saying, we are going to bomb you within 3 or 4 days. We're going to drop bombs in your city. Save yourselves. Get out of town. And, of course, causing a lot of confusion, and we hope that it would impede the war effort. I have copies of them, and if you can read Japanese, you may have a copy. If you can't read Japanese, I've made copies with Don actually made copies of the Japanese signs here and the English translation on the back. O squared, 314th bomber. Thank you.
Bob, I want you to show that picture that we pulled out of your liberation. We should have made a slide of this. Mark, can you help him hold it up?
This is the picture taken on the 29th of August. Harold Sasson is the person in white.
And if you and Bob will have that up there later. But if you'll notice on the roof of the building, it says POW. And of course that was done so that they knew where to drop the supplies.
I heard that was put up there with toothpaste from the barrels, taken from the barrels that were dropped to us. One other picture I have, may I talk about it?
Yeah.
The Zamborini book, Unbroken, mentions Amori. And the picture that I have here is of our country club at the Amori camp. And you can see what it was like for the Bataan and the Corregidor prisoners, what kind of a camp they lived in. It's quite interesting, although the men there look in rather good shape. Most of them had pellagra and berry and a few other things, and they were over the starving period, but they still had problems later on.